Everyone thinks the biggest question around Shedeur Sanders is where he'll play next. But that's not the real question. The real question is who's going to be calling the shots when it actually matters. Right now, while Shedeur is overseas, laying low and staying quiet, a decision is being shaped behind closed doors that could define his entire future. And it's happening in a place with a long history of getting these moments wrong. Because this time, it's not just about talent, it's about control. Cleveland is deep into its head coaching search, and the name quietly gaining momentum isn't a flashy veteran or a household name. It's a younger offensive mind that some fans believe could finally unlock what Shedeur does best. But what's making headlines isn't just who they're considering, it's how they're doing it. Reports say coaching candidates aren't just sitting down for interviews. They're being handed essays, personality tests, homework, and that detail alone has set the internet on fire. Some fans see it as thorough. Others see it as another sign that Cleveland is overthinking itself into another mistake, because this isn't a college application. This is the NFL, and it raises a question nobody can ignore. What kind of coach is actually willing to go through all of that? For a younger coach trying to prove himself, maybe it's an opportunity. For an established name with options, it might be a deal breaker. And that dynamic could quietly shape the entire outcome before the Browns even realize it. Which brings it back to Shedeur. Because if Cleveland gets this hire right, everything changes. His freedom, his development, his ability to push the ball downfield. But if they get it wrong, it won't matter how talented he is. And the scary part, this feels like one of those moments where Cleveland decides who they are, for better or for worse. Right now, Shedeur Sanders looks completely unbothered. While fans are refreshing timelines and debating his future every day, Shedeur is overseas, enjoying his time, moving quietly and doing exactly what franchise quarterbacks tend to do when they know their value. There's no panic, no public pressure campaign, no cryptic messages, just calm confidence. And that's what makes this moment so interesting. Because behind the scenes, everything around him is anything but calm. Shedeur doesn't need to say a word for teams to understand what's at stake. His talent is obvious, his arm strength, his ability to read defenses, his confidence in tight windows. But what's becoming clearer is that his next chapter won't be defined by highlights alone. It'll be defined by structure, philosophy, and most importantly, who's in charge of the offense when games tighten up. That's why this stretch matters so much. While Shedeur stays low-key, organizations are quietly deciding whether they want to build around him or simply plug him into something that already exists. And history shows that those two approaches don't lead to the same results. The wrong system can make even elite talent look limited. Conservative play calling, predictable schemes, an offense that plays not to lose instead of playing to win. Those things don't show up on draft night, but they show up every Sunday. And Shedeur knows that. That's why his silence feels intentional. He doesn't need to campaign. He doesn't need to chase narratives. Teams already understand the equation. If you want Shedeur Sanders to reach his ceiling, you need more than just a roster spot. You need vision. That's where Cleveland enters the conversation. Because the Browns aren't just evaluating a quarterback. They're deciding what kind of football identity they want moving forward. Aggressive or cautious, modern or outdated, player first or system first. And while Shedeur is miles away, enjoying life and staying locked in, those decisions are being made without him in the room, but directly in his shadow. That's the tension no one's really talking about. This isn't a loud moment. It's a quiet one. The kind that feels small now but looks massive later when everything finally clicks into place or falls apart. And what Cleveland does next will tell Shedeur everything he needs to know, without a single word being spoken. For a while, Cleveland's coaching search felt scattered. A lot of names, a lot of noise. But lately, one name has started coming up more than the rest quietly but consistently. That name is Grant Udinski. He's not the loudest candidate. He's not a headline grabber. And that's exactly why the buzz around him feels different. Reports suggest Udinski has now completed a second interview with the Cleveland Browns, and in NFL circles, second interviews don't happen by accident. They happen when a team sees alignment. What makes this interesting is just Udinski's age or resume. It's what he represents, a modern offensive mind, someone comfortable letting quarterbacks push the ball instead of protecting the playbook, someone who doesn't coach scared. And that's where the conversation naturally shifts to Shedeur Sanders. Because when people talk about Udinski, they're not just talking about schemes. They're talking about fit. The idea that Shedeur's strengths, his confidence, his arm, his willingness to attack defenses would actually be encouraged instead of managed. Fans have picked up on that quickly. Online reactions show a clear pattern. Some are excited, some are cautious. But a lot of people are saying the same thing in different ways. Don't let this one slip. And that kind of response doesn't come from hype alone. It comes from frustration with what they've already seen. There's a growing belief that Cleveland has played things too safe for too long. Quick throws, conservative reads, offenses built to survive instead of dominate. And while none of that is officially blamed on one person, it's part of the context surrounding this hire. Udinski, at least on paper, feels like a pivot. That doesn't mean he's a lock, and it doesn't mean he's the perfect answer, but it does mean Cleveland is seriously considering a different direction, one that prioritizes development over comfort. Still, there's an unspoken tension underneath all of this. Because the more momentum Udinski gains, the more obvious the risk becomes. If Cleveland believes in him, they'll have to fully commit. And this organization doesn't exactly have a reputation for doing things cleanly. That's why this name matters so much right now. Not because it guarantees success, but because it signals intent. And what Cleveland does with that intent will say a lot about whether this is finally a step forward or just another almost. This is where the conversation takes a turn. Because once reports started coming out about how the Cleveland Browns are handling their head coaching search, the focus shifted almost instantly. It wasn't about schemes anymore. It wasn't about play calling or experience. It was about process. According to multiple reports, coaching candidates aren't just being interviewed. They're being asked to complete essays, take personality tests, finish what's being described as homework. And the moment that information hit the public, reactions poured in from every direction. Some people defended it. They called it thorough, forward-thinking, a way to fully understand who a coach is beyond the surface. But a much louder group saw it differently. To them, it felt excessive, corporate, almost disconnected from how the NFL usually operates. And that's why it raised eyebrows. Because at this level, most coaches aren't trying to prove they belong. They already have track records. They've run locker rooms. They've managed egos. They've handled pressure. So the idea of asking established candidates to sit down and write essays immediately rubbed some fans the wrong way. Online, the jokes came fast. People joked about Scantron sheets, about grading curves, about whether winning games mattered less than filling out the right answers. And while a lot of it was humor, there was a real concern underneath it. What kind of coach actually agrees to this? It's been said that younger candidates might be more open to the process. They're still climbing, still hungry, still willing to jump through extra hoops for the opportunity. But for veteran coaches, the ones who have already been there, this kind of process could feel unnecessary. And that's where things get tricky. Because if Cleveland unintentionally filters out experienced options, that's not strategy, that's self-sabotage. And Browns fans have seen versions of that story before. Naturally, this also pulls attention toward ownership. While nothing has been officially confirmed, Many believe this process reflects the influence of Jimmy Haslam, whose hands-on reputation is already well known. Whether that's fair or not, perception matters. And right now, perception is doing a lot of damage. This hearing process isn't just about finding a coach. It's about trust. Trust from fans, trust from candidates, trust that Cleveland understands what moment it's actually in. Because when the process becomes the headline, the football almost becomes secondary. And that's the part that makes this feel familiar, in a way Browns fans were hoping to avoid. No matter how much Cleveland tries to frame this search as collaborative, there's one presence fans can't stop thinking about. That presence is Jimmy Haslam. Officially, nothing has been said. There are no press conferences pointing fingers, no statements admitting influence. But in Cleveland, perception has a long memory, and that memory hasn't been kind. For years, Browns fans have believed that ownership sits closer to the wheel than it should. Fair or not, that belief has been shaped by constant resets. New coaches, new systems, new philosophies, and each time the promise sounds the same, this time will be different. That's why this hearing process feels so loaded. When reports surfaced about essays and personality testing, many fans didn't see innovation. They saw fingerprints. The kind that suggests decisions aren't just about football, they're about control, structure, and alignment at the very top. Again, that doesn't mean Haslam is directly writing questions or grading responses. But it does mean fans believe this process reflects ownership values more than locker room realities. And in the NFL, that perception alone can shape outcomes. Coaches talk, agents talk, front offices definitely talk. And when an organization gets labeled as overly hands-on, it creates hesitation. Not public hesitation, quiet hesitation. The kind where top-tier candidates listen, nod, and then wait for a better opportunity elsewhere. That's the fear creeping in right now. Because if Cleveland's process unintentionally filters out strong, experienced coaches who don't want extra layers of oversight, then the search becomes narrower by default. Not because the Browns chose that path, but because others quietly stepped away from it. For fans, this isn't about blaming one person. It's about pattern recognition. The sense that Cleveland keeps adding complexity when clarity is what's needed most. And that matters even more with a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders potentially entering the picture. Young quarterbacks don't just need talent around them. They need stability, a clear chain of command, an offense where decisions are made quickly and confidently, not filtered through layers of approval. So when Haslam's name starts floating through the conversation, it's not anger, it's anxiety. Because Browns fans aren't worried about intent. They're worried about history repeating itself. And until Cleveland proves it can separate ownership vision from football execution, that shadow isn't going anywhere, no matter who ends up holding the clipboard. On the surface, Cleveland's coaching process looks complicated. But once you zoom out, it creates a very specific advantage, and it doesn't apply to everyone. It applies to Grant Udinski. For a younger coach, this kind of process isn't intimidating. It's familiar. Essays, evaluations, personality breakdowns, these are things Udinski has likely dealt with his entire career. He's still in the phase where proving alignment matters just as much as proving results. And that's why, according to reports, he's moved forward. This process rewards patience, flexibility, willingness to explain how you think, not just what you've already done. For someone still building his resume, that's an opportunity, not an obstacle. It allows Udinski to sell vision, creativity, and long-term upside instead of being judged strictly on years in the league. But that same structure creates the opposite effect for everyone else. Veteran coaches don't need extra layers to validate their identity. They've already built cultures, already managed elite locker rooms, already been through playoff runs. So when a process starts to feel like reapplication instead of evaluation, it quietly changes the calculus. And that's where Cleveland may be narrowing its own options. It's not that experienced coaches are afraid of scrutiny. It's that they don't need it. When other openings exist, ones that offer trust, autonomy, and clarity, those coaches can afford to wait. And sometimes they do. That's why Udinski's rise feels less like coincidence and more like compatibility. The process fits him, his career stage, his mindset, his hunger. And that doesn't make him the wrong choice, but it does mean Cleveland has to understand what it's trading away in the process. Because when you filter for compliance, you risk filtering out leverage. And that matters even more when you bring Shedeur Sanders back into the picture. Young quarterbacks benefit from innovation, yes, but they also benefit from authority, from coaches who don't need to convince anyone they belong. Coaches who can walk into a room and immediately command trust. Udinski might grow into that. He might thrive, but Cleveland would be asking him to do that while navigating one of the most complex environments in the league. So this moment cuts both ways. The Browns are creating a path that makes sense for one type of coach and less sense for others. And whether that's strategic or accidental, it's shaping the outcome before the final decision is even made. That's the risk hiding in plain sight. Because the process doesn't just select a coach, it selects the kind of future Cleveland is willing to commit to. This is where everything connects back to Shedeur Sanders, and why this coaching decision matters more than people want to admit. Shedeur isn't just another quarterback prospect who needs time to adjust. His game is already built on confidence, anticipation, and a willingness to attack defenses. He trusts his arm, he trusts his reads, and most importantly, he trusts himself when plays break down. But that kind of quarterback only thrives in the right environment. In the wrong system, those strengths get muted. Playbooks shrink. Reads become conservative. Big throws turn into checkdowns. And suddenly, a quarterback known for control and creativity starts looking limited, not because he is, but because the offense won't let him be himself. That's the fear lurking underneath this entire conversation. Cleveland has spent years leaning toward caution. Offenses designed to avoid mistakes rather than create problems. Quarterbacks asked to manage games instead of define them. And while that approach can work in short stretches, it rarely unlocks a player's ceiling. For Shedeur, ceiling matters. That's why the idea of a coach like Grant Udinski even enters the conversation. Not because he's proven at the highest level, but because he represents a philosophical shift. Reports suggest he favors aggression, spacing, and giving quarterbacks real control at the line. If that's true, it aligns naturally with how Shedeur already plays. But alignment alone isn't enough. Shedeur also needs clarity. He needs to know who's in charge when the pressure hits, who makes the final call on Sundays, who trusts him in third and long moments when the safe option is to pull back. That's where Cleveland's structure becomes just as important as its scheme. If too many voices are involved, confidence gets diluted. If decisions feel filtered, quarterbacks hesitate. And for someone like Shedeur, who plays best when instincts take over, hesitation is the enemy. This isn't about guaranteeing success. It's about avoiding preventable failure. Shedeur's talent will travel anywhere, but his growth depends on freedom, trust, and a system that doesn't flinch when he takes calculated risks. Whether Cleveland can offer that is still an open question. And that's why this hire isn't just about finding the best coach. It's about choosing what kind of quarterback they actually want Shedeur Sanders to become, a protected piece or a centerpiece. Because once that choice is made, there's no undoing it. There's one risk hovering over this entire situation that rarely gets said directly, mostly because it's uncomfortable. The risk isn't that Cleveland picks the wrong coach. It's that they overthink themselves out of the right one. On paper, the Browns' process looks intelligent, detailed, methodical, designed to avoid mistakes. But sometimes that exact mindset becomes the mistake, because football decisions don't happen in spreadsheets. They happen in real time under pressure with incomplete information. And Cleveland has a history here. Time and time again, this organization has chased the perfect answer instead of the right one. More steps, more safeguards, more layers of approval, and each time the margin between confidence and hesitation quietly disappears. That's the danger now. When a hearing process becomes this complex, it doesn't just evaluate candidates, it filters personalities. Coaches who thrive on instinct, authority, and fast decision-making may see this environment and hesitate. Not publicly, not dramatically. They just wait, or pivot, or take a call somewhere else. And Cleveland is left choosing between who's available, not who's ideal. That matters when you're potentially tying your future to Shedeur Sanders. Quarterbacks like Shedeur don't need perfection. They need decisiveness. They need clarity. They need to know the organization believes in a direction strongly enough to commit, even when it's uncomfortable. The unspoken risk is that Cleveland ends up with a coach who fits the process instead of fitting the moment. Someone who checks every box, says the right things, aligns perfectly on paper, but doesn't shift the culture when it counts, doesn't challenge conservative instincts, doesn't push the organization forward when playing it safe feels easier. And the worst part, that kind of outcome doesn't fail loudly, it fails slowly. The offense looks fine. The record hovers around average. Progress feels just close enough to justify patience. And before anyone realizes what happened, another window quietly closes. This isn't about blaming ownership, or front offices, or candidates. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most dangerous decision isn't the risky one. It's the cautious one disguised as intelligence. Cleveland is standing at that line right now. And whether they realize it or not, this hire will reveal something deeper than football philosophy. It will show whether the Browns trust their instincts, or whether they're still trying to outthink a problem that requires belief more than analysis. Because in the NFL, hesitation doesn't just slow progress. It quietly defines it. In the end, this decision isn't really about resumes, interviews, or even playbooks. It's about identity. The Cleveland Browns aren't just hearing a head coach. They're choosing what kind of organization they want to be at a moment that actually matters. Not in theory, not 2 years from now, right now. Because quarterbacks like Shedeur Sanders don't come with unlimited patience windows. They arrive with expectations from fans, from media, and from themselves. And once a direction is set, it becomes very hard to undo. That's why this choice feels heavier than most. Cleveland can choose comfort, structure, a process that prioritizes alignment, control, and predictability. There's safety in that path. It minimizes embarrassment, it protects decision makers, and on paper it always looks responsible. Or they can choose belief. Belief in a vision. Belief in a coach who fits the moment, not just the checklist. Belief that modern football rewards decisiveness more than caution. And belief that if you're going to tie your future to a quarterback with confidence and edge, you need to match that energy from the top down. That's where names like Udinski become symbolic, not because they guarantee success, but because they represent a willingness to pivot, to trust upside, to accept that growth comes with risk. And that's the part Cleveland can't fake. Fans don't need perfection. They need clarity. They need to feel like the organization knows what it's doing and why it's doing it. Because uncertainty doesn't just hurt wins and losses, it erodes trust. This hire will echo far beyond the press release. It will shape how players view Cleveland, how coaches talk about it behind the scenes, and how quarterbacks evaluate whether this is a place where careers are elevated or managed. Shedeur won't say much publicly. He doesn't need to. Quarterbacks read between the lines better than anyone. They notice who's empowered, who's trusted, and who's protected by layers of approval. So when this decision finally comes down, it won't just answer who the Browns hired. It will answer a much bigger question. Is Cleveland finally ready to commit to a direction? Or are they still trying to engineer certainty in a league that doesn't reward hesitation? Because once this choice is made, everything that follows will make sense. For better or for familiar reasons Browns fans already know too well.